Hello and welcome to Court Watch with Jason Kotowski. I'm Jose Franco. In this program on KGT, we are taking a look at the cases making their way through the Kern County court system and taking a look at the cases, discussing those with court reporter Jason Kotowski, the ones that have caught your attention on KGT.com. We will bring in now Jason Kotowski, who is taking part of his day today to go over some of these cases. Jason, I want to start this week with a post on social media that went viral that caught a lot of people's attention. Negative attention, of course, for a case that's so violent and personal. But of course, we're going to talk about the case this week. A post on social media that went viral showing a man spitting and kicking a woman. The video upset many people on social media. The Bakersfield Police Department investigated, and now a man has been charged. Jason, what can you tell us about this case?
Yes, Jared Ray Gentry is the man identified from that video. And it is very disturbing video. It made the rounds. This incident happened on February 13th outside a home on Rodeo Avenue near Old Farm Road. Now, police didn't become aware of it until February 25th. It started to get some traction on social media, was posted on multiple places and shared. Police got wind of it, watched it, and started an investigation based on what was seen in that video, which, as you said, is clearly kicking and spitting on a woman outside the home there. Now, on February 28th, there was a second incident, we've come to find out through court documents, and that's when Jared Gentry was arrested. He and the woman from that video were at a hotel room, and there was a child there. And I should mention there was a child present at both incidents, at both scenes. On the 28th, at this hotel room, it's alleged that Gentry again abused this woman and that he struck her in the face with his hand was slapped her in the face, hit her in the ribs, and the child was in the room, and the maid allegedly witnessed this incident. So police have multiple witnesses to what happened there. He's been charged now. He was in court on Tuesday. Not guilty pleas were entered, and he's due back in court next week for a pre-preliminary hearing. But it's not expected that the preliminary hearing will be held this month. That's probably going to be a little while still.
Right. Now, I just wanted to ask a couple of the complications in a case like this. Now, one of the things, I don't have the stats in front of me, but these kinds of stories or these kinds of incidents don't really get reported, I don't want to say frequently, but sometimes they really don't. And I just wanted to ask about, how do police get involved here? What's the process of getting this? I mean, it has to start with a report, isn't that right? That's
correct. And you're also right. In some instances, victims don't want to report this. They're afraid of retaliation, or they think, and we've heard this before, is that this maybe will just be a one-time incident, or if it's happened multiple times before, it won't happen again. He's promised me it won't happen again, and he could be someone who they rely on for shelter or for food, or basically for an income too. So to get an investigation started on this, police really need something like what happened here. A lot of times it does happen through social media. Something will be posted, it'll be brought to police attention, and they'll take a look at it with video like this, very clear video of an assault taking place. And at that point, they can work to identify who are the people involved in this, where was this taken, and develop further information.
Right, and I was just going to ask about the public outcry. That does help in a case like this where it can get attention, but like I was saying, like you need to report to start that investigation?
Correct. And I'm not sure who initially posted this video, but it did make the rounds. It was shared dozens of times. It was all over the place, and police were made aware of it, launched an investigation, and eventually made an arrest.
And he was out on bail, Gentry, the last we checked?
No, currently he's being held, and I don't know if it's because of both incidents happening so closely to each other, but last I checked, he was being held on $500,000 bail and was still in custody.
Right, okay. So we'll move on to the next one, but before we go on to the next case, we do want to bring up a number for people who may be going through an incident like this. If you are a victim of domestic violence or know someone who is, help is available. You can always call 911 if it is an emergency. You can also call the Open Door Network at their 24-hour crisis hotline at 327-1091, or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the next case here. This involved a crime that happened near where we are in downtown Bakersfield at Tegler Hotel. A man has been accused of fatally stabbing a woman and wounding a man at Tegler Hotel on 8th Street, nearby here in downtown Bakersfield. Now, this attack happened on February 26th. Kevin Lamont Jones was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. Jason, you got a hold of documents that give a little more context to this story. What can you tell us about this case?
Yes, according to the court documents that we've received, this started as an argument over trash left in the hallway. Now, I don't know if this was an ongoing thing, if it was recent between them, but there was some sort of argument between Kevin Lamont Jones and his neighbors, one of whom was Chandra Rayan Gibson. And apparently this argument turned ugly. It's alleged in the documents that Gibson and the man she was with used racial slurs against Jones, who is black. Jones made a comment about, something about "I'll stab you." He said something about that, something about inflicting violence on them, but goes back to his room. A couple hours pass, and then there's another blow up between them. At this point, Jones goes back to his room. According to the police reports, he grabs a knife, and both Gibson and the man who was with her end up being stabbed. Gibson fatally. She does end up dying. The man survives his wounds. Right.
So this was interesting because it's a sensitive case anytime it's brought up race, and you did mention the race of the victims. There were alleged racial slurs involved here before the incident, right? And I just wanted to kind of ask about this. There was no hate crime charge involved here, right? Is it possible that a charge like that be added later on if there is something that comes up in this investigation?
In this case, I never want to say for sure what could happen in a case.
Yeah, because you're not the one doing the charging.
Exactly.
You're going over the cases that the reports that we get that you read over very carefully, and we report on these things. But is that something that the district attorney may decide to do later on to add to this, or if it's within the boundaries of this case?
I would think it would be more like if Jones had been the one using a racial slur, if he had been the one, or something against a certain religion or group of people, if he had shouted something and then killed someone of that group of people or religion, then I think you'd be looking at it. The fact that the victims used it, not so much. That could just be that they provoked him. And that's something his defense attorney could argue is like, listen, he was really provoked. He snapped when he heard that word. It was just lingering. But I don't see any hate crime being involved here.
Okay. I was just wanted to make sure because it stood out to me. Maybe I read it a little too quickly, that story. But you did bring it up. This might be something that a defense attorney brings up as a defense, that kind of provocation. Is like a self-defense. Is that something that you see often in a case like this? Or
Exactly, and that's one of the things Jones told investigators. He admitted, he said, I armed myself. I had a knife on me, but he also told them, he said, they got stabbed as they approached me, according to him. He didn't come forward and attack them. They approached him and tried to take the knife away, and he said that's when they ended up getting stabbed. So I could see an attorney using that for a self-defense argument.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know, just in case that, in the times that you've seen so many cases, here in Kern County, is it something that is looked upon negatively? Does it depend on the judge? Does it depend on the case? Does it depend on a jury to kind of hear and listen to that kind of defense?
It all depends on the jury. It depends what other evidence is there. And I don't know, we haven't received the full reports yet. This is just the probable cause declaration. But the full reports, maybe there's going to be an indication that there was ongoing animosity between these two. And maybe, things had been said previously that just led to this explosive incident.
Yeah, it's still early on in the case.
Exactly.
Right? It's still early on.
This is very new, and it being a murder case, we're not going to see this go to trial for months, if not sometime till next year or even further.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with that, let's again, that was one of the main stories that we were covering this week on KGT.com. Now we want to go on to another one here this week, and this is an interesting one because I have a few questions about how this works. About the process here. Just want to go over this case here about someone who allegedly set fire to their workplace. A judge said that there is enough evidence for a case to proceed against a man accused of starting a fire at an Amazon distribution center. The man was an employee at Amazon when he allegedly set the fires when this happened.
That's correct.
And I remember that when we heard about this, a fire at an Amazon, it sounds like of course we're going to get a lot of attention to it. Amazon is a major employer here. But what can you tell us about this case where someone allegedly set fires at where they worked?
Yes, this is the case of the man's name is Monty Gorey. Last year, as you said, there was a fire broke out at the Amazon facility on Petrel Road, and there was a lot of damage done. They reviewed surveillance video, and they also reviewed who was working at the time. And Gorey was one of the employees working at the time. And in the surveillance video, which we've seen, it shows a man identified as Gorey twice attempting to light what they call a pod on fire. And these pods are like a stack of pallets containing goods. The motive for this is unclear, at least from what I've read in the documents. But on the second attempt, one of these pods is set on fire. And the sprinklers, what happens is that causes damage to that pod and to the nearby pods. So you're probably looking at thousands of dollars in damage right there. But it also activates the sprinkler system, which floods that floor and causes damage not only to that floor, but the floor below it. So it says in the reports that one Amazon official said that they would have to close the facility for several days. And he said it would cost them millions in lost productivity and shipping out. Again, we're not sure what the motive was behind this, but the video clearly shows someone, again, identified as Gorey, and they also checked the employee identification number, the ID badge that was swiped. They're saying there is no doubt that this is Monty Gorey. And at a preliminary hearing, the level of evidence is much lower than at a trial. So what the prosecutor will do is they may call a couple witnesses, maybe even just one, and just lay out this is what it is. And there'll be some questions, maybe some back and forth with the defense, but a judge, more often than not, because the standard is so low at a preliminary hearing, more often than not, the case proceeds and it will go on to either a trial or a possible plea deal.
Okay, yeah. So, so for something like this, that there needs to be enough evidence to even allow the process to happen? Because that's the first time, I'll be frank, first time I've heard, what was it, stand to face trial. Like, I just thought that it was, here's, evidence that they present, there's an arraignment, and then it goes from there. But attorneys or prosecutors have to show that this crime or the alleged crime is reasonable enough for that case to proceed?
Yes, exactly. That they have enough evidence that this should go forward. And so it's called a preliminary hearing. And again, sometimes they're very quick. Sometimes it can be 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes it can last a whole day or several days, depending on how many defendants and the seriousness of the crime. Murder cases typically take longer. But a judge does sit and listen to evidence. It's almost like a mini trial. A couple witnesses are called. The defense has a chance to cross-examine them. But the defense typically does not call any witnesses during a preliminary hearing. They can if they want to. But again, the level of the evidence required is so low that a lot of times they'll just submit it to the court and let the court decide at that point.
Okay, and then in this case, ironically, we don't have video of this, so we're just kind of chatting here in front of the cameras. But, video is a major factor, I assume, in a case like this where you can pinpoint somebody, there's security, tagging or using a card to enter. How major of a factor is it in this case? Have you seen documents that say how covered this facility was with cameras?
Well, it's Amazon. I mean, I think every Amazon facility has dozens and dozens of cameras, and they cover basically every square foot there. And the video that I saw was, again, it was very clear. It captures the whole thing in motion from the time of the first attempt to light it on fire. I think it was a piece of paper that he took and shoved it into the pod and tried to light it on fire. And the second attempt was successful, and you see the flames rise up and smoke start going everywhere. That video is so important. And it's one of those cases where probably they just have to show that video and say, hey, this is multiple people that work there have identified this employee as Monty Gorey, and also he swiped in that day. He was working on that floor that day, to say that this is this guy and this is what he did.
I don't want to ever say that a case is simple. I don't think a prosecutor or an attorney would want that to happen. But it's going to be a matter of saying A, B, C, then D, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And
exactly.
Then just one more question about this. Is Amazon liable, potentially liable for facing any kind of lawsuits from anyone that was in the facility at the time, like civil liability for not having a safe environment, anything like that?
I don't believe so. I don't think this is anything that Amazon could have prevented. It's just if someone acts out in that way, it's almost like, what can you do? This is one of your employees. I'm sure they do background checks of everyone they hire, and if there was nothing in that background to alert them to anything of any serious crimes in the past, I'm not sure what they could do. I also, if I remember correctly, I want to say this was on a weekend, and that it was not as heavily staffed. I remember looking from the video, at least, it wasn't a packed area where this guy was. He seemed to be kind of by himself in this location. So I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, that it was not at a point of where this was a packed facility. There were hundreds of people there. But it was a serious enough incident that it did cost them quite a bit of money, and they had to close for a while.
Right. Okay. Well, that's enough for that case. We'll move on to one more here. One more story that finally come to a conclusion this week. Finally, this week, a woman was sentenced in a 2024 Valentine's Day crash. It injured several other drivers who were struck by the vehicle that she was driving. What can you tell us about this case where a woman got into a collision at Chester and California Avenue in 2024?
That's correct. It was Chester in California, a nasty crash, several vehicles. The driver, who it was determined was under the influence of drugs at the time, was Joanna Bojorquez Higuera. Mm-hmm. And this crash had injured a couple people had broken bones. Others were obviously very shook up. In fact, at her sentencing this week, one of the victims came forward and talked about how he still thinks about this, how emotionally, this is still devastating to him and his family, and that even short trips to take his grandchildren across town, he thinks about this. It's had a lasting impact on him. Now, at the time, Bojorquez Higuera, she was arrested. She was interviewed by police at the hospital and made a number of bizarre comments. Among them, telling the investigator, the detective that was interviewing her, that I have no bones. Things that just didn't make any sense. She was acting strangely and admitted that she'd taken meth a couple days earlier. Actually, she took fentanyl a few days earlier and said she couldn't recall the last time she took meth. But from her behavior and then later from her talk screen, it came back that yes, she had these drugs in her system. And I believe also alcohol. It may have just been drugs, actually. No, it was a drug driving. Yes, just drugs. But still impaired driving, and she was in no condition to be on the road. And caused a lot of damage and injuries to people. So what happened was they held a competency hearing where it was determined that she was incompetent to stand trial, meaning that she did not understand the charges against her and she could not assist her attorney in preparing a defense.
Right. So yeah, that's one thing that I did want to ask about. That this was interesting in that this didn't go to trial right away. But
Correct.
Yeah, like you said, that she needed to go before going to trial. She had to be ruled competent.
Yes.
Now, in your experience, how often does that, or how long might that take? Because if I'm remembering, or I'm pretty sure that there are other cases that are still ongoing because the competency can't be found, or the defendant can't, defend themselves in court. So,
Correct.
How often does that happen? Like, that's what's interesting to me about this one.
Sure. It's something that you see, it's certainly not unusual for someone to be found incompetent. And as for how long, it could be, usually it's a minimum of a few months, but it can stretch into over a year, even a couple years. So it's just of a matter of how that person responds to treatment. And what happens is they're sent to a state hospital where psychiatrists work with them to restore them to competency. Mm-hmm. And so Bojorquez Higuera, she spent months there, was found that she had been restored to competency, and I can tell you from her demeanor in court, it was far different this past week when she was sentenced as to when she originally appeared.
Right, and we didn't have cameras in the sentencing at the time.
Correct.
Right. So the video that you're seeing is her in court when she was, the first court appearance, I believe it was.
Yes.
And so yeah, you could see the facial gestures she's making.
Yes.
Kind of maybe.
In fact, her initial court appearance, she was removed from the courtroom before the media was allowed inside because of her outbursts. And so it actually got postponed the initial time. And then even on the second occasion when she finally was arraigned, she was talking throughout, making facial gestures, and was very much unlike most of the other defendants.
Causing a scene. She was disorderly.
Exactly.
Right? And the judge really can't have that. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this one, Jason. Thank you so much for your time. It's
Thank you.
Back to work.
Yes.
And for many people watching here, it'll be also back to work. So that does it for this edition of Court Watch with Jason Kotowski. Be sure to keep up to date on these stories and many others on KGET.com. Thank you for watching.